everybody, and hello, Kurt. It is good to see you. And Kurt Schnakenberg is a good friend of mine here in Chicago, so we get to see each other in person pretty frequently, which is always fun to do these interviews with people I know well. Kurt, I'm going to start up with an easy question for you. How long have you been wearing hats on a regular basis? Is it a whole life thing? Because we're both kind of hat guys, and we joke about it. So what's your story?
Well, see, you've got the easier side, man, because you still have hair. Mine, I've a gravity affected, right? So I've got the full beard now, but I got, nothing going on. So as gravity set in and I started losing it on top, I decided I didn't want sunburn all the time and that I look much better with something. So the hat. So let's say I'm 15 years in.
So 15 years was when the baldness started to set in for you.
That's right.
The
That's
answer
right.
to that. Yeah. It runs on both sides of my family, man. So I'm wearing the hat in preparation for it. It hasn't even really hit me yet, but I'm like, it's gonna, in the next 5 years, it's coming. It's just a question of how hard it hits.
My father has like a long, full head of hair. Up until a couple of years ago, he had a long ponytail. And I'm like, what? How is this fair? Like, this doesn't work.
Oh, those friggin' people with ponytails into their 60s. Damn them. So this is kind of I actually will ask you this because this is kind of a somewhat serious question. Do you ever I actually think about this a fair bit because one of my businesses sells to financial advisors. They're kind of a buttoned up crowd, right? And I sometimes think about the presentation I'm giving off to them and how I look as an entrepreneur. Now, I will admit in the work from home days and everything's virtual, it's a lot easier to be casual than it used to be. Nobody expects you to be in a suit and tie, but some of these guys are like jackets and ties every day still, and I don't know if that's ever been something you've thought about, worried about, or in your industry, is it actually kind of almost a positive to be a little more grounded and down to earth looking?
Yeah, you mean because of the ZZ Top beard and the tattoos and the hat and all of it?
So we'll give some background. Kurt co-owns Chicago Brass, which is, you could talk about that. And then also another agency that we'll talk about that you're starting. But yeah, I mean, has it been good, bad, or just kind of indifferent for you?
I think so. In our core, sort of tenured business, Chicago Brass, in some places it's helped because our target market are architects, designers, general contractors, right? And so the GC, the field guys that, half of them are vets, lots of trades, they're cool with it. The architects and a little less so. The designers are good. The office people at the GCs don't always love it. So I think it's been a little bit. It's memorable. The beard's memorable, right? So I meet people and I'm like, yeah, we talked at this other meeting, and I don't remember, but I think it stands out maybe enough a little bit. So, and I also think today's world, right? People want uniqueness. They want to talk to an authentic person, not just a cookie cutter replica of someone else they've met before. So I don't know. Maybe, but not enough that has really hurt me. And I found, and if there are people running away from me because of it, I'm like, you know what? You're probably not the person I want to interact with anyway. So it's okay, right?
Yeah. The world's a big place. I always think about it that way. Look, if a customer is so petty as to be worried about the look or whatever of me or somebody on the team, I just feel like, man, let's move on. It's fine. There'll be more fish in the sea.
It creates a space for other people to be themselves and unique, right? So I find I have a diverse range of people who associate with me, and I associate with partially because of it, because I don't fit this sort of stigma, and it makes it easy.
Yeah, for me, it's kind of I'm kind of similar. I like to just blend in with any crowd, and in a way, being a normal looking person, not looking like I'm super, I don't know, accomplished or professional. It's kind of a nice way to stay under the people's radar. Somebody might ask me at go to a kid's school, and they might ask, oh, so what do you do? And I'm like, yeah, I do some, creative marketing or something. And it's great, guy's got tattoos up his arm, and he's wearing a hat. He probably looks like the type that's going to do that. They don't go into, they don't need to know I own a couple companies and I do more on the finance and, business acquisition side than I do on the marketing side. But anyway, let's get into the meat of this. I want to talk about your first, the company that you kind of came into, and Chicago Brass, and then with this podcast specifically, we focus on agencies. And so I'd love to talk more about ADBM and what you're building there, because you've kind of got this new thing going. So you're a couple, walk me through the background. How'd this all happen?
So Chicago Brass is We are architectural consultants essentially. And so the Chicago Brass gets brought into high-end residential projects by architects, designers, general contractors to specify hardware and then ultimately supply it and distribute it. And it is a fairly stable business, right? Like we sell into the high-end luxury world. So it is pretty established. The players involved in it and the people there have been there for a while. There's not a lot of ins and outs. The total addressable market is not massive, but there's margin protection because there's only so many people that have the expertise and the knowledge and everything. And so ADBM was sort of a spinoff. There's some things I found in that industry that were frustrating, how antiquated it was and how little innovation there was and how little there was change. There were people that used these buzzwords and talked about things, but it was either, what was being brought out was either all talk and nothing was actually happening, or you were talking about these massive infrastructure investments to try and replace things without really proof of concept, right? There wasn't a lot of agility to the innovation that was happening. And so we started doing it for Chicago Brass, and then not long out, and I started talking, we're connected to the others that do what we do around the country and our vendors and different suppliers. And so I started talking to them about what we were doing. And the response that I got was, well, can you do that for us? Right. And then I'm like, wait a second, I have a product here. Like, out of the goodness of my heart, no, I'm a capitalist. So, right, like, how can I turn this into a business that, can create a service and then ultimately monetize something that we have figured out that others in our industry might not have done yet?
Yeah, this is really cool because I say this a lot to entrepreneurs who are thinking about starting a business, and they'll say something like, oh, I don't know if I want to start an agency because I want to build a SaaS eventually. I'm like, yeah, who fucking cares? Just start an agency if that's what can get you to like ground zero, to like having a running business that pays you enough money to live. And then you'll go see a million ideas for great SaaS products to build down the road, right? Like this is exactly like your path. It's like, yeah, I don't want to run a brass fittings company. That's boring. It's like, of course it's kind of boring, but like whatever, it gets you to like a stable point, and now you can go like find a million opportunities that are kind of cool and exciting and tech forward and all that stuff. Like, I mean, is that fair assessment of what you've seen?
Yeah, no doubt. And I think there's so much. I've had failed businesses in the past that I've like things I've started and I've like it hasn't worked, right? And actually this our agency now does mainly offshore staffing within our industry. We do some software development, but mainly offshore staffing. My original plan was mainly software development with a little bit of staffing, right? We pivoted. And so many entrepreneurs, we think we're smarter than everyone and we have it figured out. And so we come with this product, and then it's, why isn't the market accepting our product, right? And it's the market's fault. It's not us. It's not the product. It's the market's fault. Oh, if the economy was better, it would be working. Or, if I put all this money in advertising, it'll work, or whatever. It's like, no, your product, people just don't want it. And so, finding that product that fits, that people want, that is there's a natural demand for, is so empowering. And I think, but you can, if you're paying attention, you can find those opportunities, to your point, in some of your more traditional ongoing businesses. They're there, right? You just have to be flexible. And there's opportunities all over the place.
What were some of the indicators that this was the opportunity for you to pursue? Because you're not, I mean, you're what, a year and a half into doing it? Is that right?
A little less. I mean, in all fairness, our revenues are growing pretty substantially. But we really got off the ground with this 3.5 months ago.
Okay. Yeah. So it's really new. So what were the signs that was like, I mean, you're going to trade shows. I'm guessing you're talking to customers about what you're doing, or your clients or partners or, competitors, whatever, about what you're doing. And all of a sudden they start to go, this is cool. Like, how many times did you hear that before you're like, yeah, let's fucking do it?
So Chicago Brass, my primary business ultimately, and hopefully a year from now, I'm telling you, this is my primary business, but I believe in the product because it worked so well for Chicago Brass, and it went there. And when as I shared the story with others, it was not complicated. It didn't take me 10 minutes. I didn't have to have a pitch deck, right? I didn't have to have all these there was no smoke and mirrors. It was, here's our simple product, right? And one thing I've adjusted as I come into this new business from what I did in my old one, like, I'm keeping everything as simple as humanly possible. I have a very simple product. You like it or you don't, right? And I'll listen to feedback and work. And so when I was getting very positive response to my simple product, and I wasn't having to follow up. They were like, yes, let's book a meeting to walk through this, right? When they were saying, we want this and here's the next step, then I was like, all right, I'm in. I found something, I'm in, let's do it. And I'm excited to sell it, right? Like I think the product development side and honing your logo and doing all that fun stuff, right? When I found I was more excited about selling the product than I was about that vanity work, then I'm like, I've got something, right? Because I can do this.
I felt that with my first business, this like the market just sucking me in. Like I almost couldn't say like I couldn't say no. There's too many people being like, I'm ready to pay you. Like, let's get going, you know? And that's like, I better fucking do this then because I don't know what, you don't get many opportunities like that. I feel like that's kind of the thing that I saw or I took away from that experience was like, every one of your business ideas, if we're going to do multiple things over the course of a long career, most of them will not hit like that. Most of them will be like kind of half duds, or you'll take years to figure it out and grind it around. And then all of a sudden you'll hit one that's just like a gold rush and you're like right time, right place, right skills. And it's like, you got to just jump onto that, right? Like that feels like it's lightning in a bottle. Go get it.
I was talking to someone about another business owner and he's like, right jockey, wrong horse. He's like, great leader, great person, but the horse, the industry, the business, like it's just never going to pan out for him. And so if you always envision yourself or see yourself as the right jockey, right, then it's finding that horse that fits. And it feels like I found one that fit here.
Yeah. So let's talk about the ADBM and, kind of what it is exactly, because most people listening aren't going to be familiar with the buildings industry and, architecture and all that. So maybe give me a little bit of like the tactical problems you're solving, and then we'll kind of get into some of the other fun stuff.
In the building materials world, there's two sides to construction. There is the construction itself, right? And the design and the architecture, but sort of the professional services side. And then there's the material side, right? And you can go to school for the professional side, but the material side, there are no classes. It is all experience driven, right? And it is time in the field. It is time working with these specific categories, but it's a tough onboard to get into that space. And so most companies in it will have a handful of rainmakers that carry most of the water, right? And then you have a handful of other people that sort of fill around the edges. They do a good job. They do good and well enough to keep them around, but not well enough to become one of the anchors. And it creates a challenging position and situation, right? And so, and the economics typically in that world is not to the point where you can carry those people perpetually, right? And so what we found is if we can offshore a lot of this, right? And we do it ethically. I mean, we're paying a very good rate. Most of our offshoring staff is in the Philippines. So we're paying a very good rate. We treat the people there fairly. We found a huge opportunity with the talent because they're used to working for IBM or HP or these massive companies where they're just a number, and they onboard them in 2 or 3 days and then they're gone 2 or 3 months later and someone else comes in and there's no investment in them as people. And so we invest in people, right? I don't care where they are. I don't care how much they're being paid. Like empathy, support, development, all these things matter and are critical to success, right? So we've been building teams to support this building materials companies in the States, right? Offshores. And it's roughly a 70% cost savings if you look at an entry-level person in the US with 3 to 4 years experienced person in the Philippines. So we're getting higher level talent at 30% of the cost.
Wow. Yeah. So you're basically taking the outsourcing model to an industry that has not traditionally outsourced because it's probably pretty old school in its approach of like to have physical offices and spaces, because you're looking at building materials. Like you kind of have to be close to people. Like there's, big shipping costs, I imagine. So like, okay, that's really interesting. And I think it's kind of cool because I think a lot of us who work in tech and, that's my background was more in tech. We just assume outsourcing's kind of been done to death and it's a given. And like that offshoring is kind of like everybody does it. And it's not even a secret anymore. We're all kind of just like, yeah, that's the life we live. But I think there's so many industries where it's just not being fully utilized. I mean, I've talked to people, that we know as well about things like your front desk support staff and stuff, like how much of that can go overseas to the Philippines or to South America or whatever, because it just makes sense given the economics of it. And yeah, so it's really cool. Now, is there resistance in your industry to that model? Because I mean, on your website, front and center is like, we're outsourcing work, like you're not hiding it. You're not saying like we're just a low cost provider. You're like, we're outsourcing it. You got to be okay with that. I think that's interesting. Like, do you face resistance, or are people like, okay, yeah, I'm ready for this. It makes sense economically.
So I think there's a couple types of resistance. There's the ideologically opposed to it, right? The sort of old, you're stealing American jobs and this is wrong, right? And if someone has that approach, we're just like, okay, we're not for you. We're not, it's just not going to work. If someone comes in and says, well, you're paying them so little and it's not ethical what you're doing, right? There we engage in conversations because I'm like, I hear what you're saying, but that's not true, right? Like generally the people are very happy. What I found to be the biggest impediment is not the people making the choices, it's their domestic coworkers at the companies they're placed with not being comfortable with the fact that, oh, well, is my job next, right? Like, what's going to happen to my job? And this, we look at it and say, look, this is about augmentation. This is about performing. So your A player, look, the C-level players, they should be scared, right? Period. And but I think they should be scared no matter what. But your A and Bs, right? Like A's should love this because it unburdens them to do more. And your Bs, realistically, if they have the capability to get to A's, this can help unleash that too. So as long as it's done, and we tell most of our clients, like, please don't start laying people off and then in the States and then replacing this way. Like that, your team will reject this and it will not work for you, right? Use it as an augmentation and a support mechanism rather than a, straight cost savings replacement.
Yeah. Give us some sense of the size or how quickly it's grown. Because again, you've only been at it a few months, like officially, but I know that, you kind of sort of knew the model because you were doing it yourself. So there's a bit of like there's some cheating there at the beginning. That's okay. But where is it at? How many people on staff or what size revenue? Like, what are you willing to share?
Yeah, sure. So I look at it in terms of placements, right? Like full-time placements. And this is a lesson I learned from my existing company is like, if there's one number that we can identify as most important, and that's the number that my staff and I talk in, right? We don't talk in dollars, we talk in full-time placements, because that to us is what, and the dollars follow, right? So I looked before we got on this. So in 3.5 months, we have placed 37 people as full-time placements. So that's a pretty big, and it's increasing month over month. So we're, approaching September. We have, I believe, 16 contracted for us to work on and placing in September, right? So that's our growth rate's pretty healthy. We really haven't invested at all in promotion or any of it. It's simply, me tapping my network, which I will accept as a cheat code, but I'll take it all day long.
I've only met a couple of service business owners who didn't come into their service business and say, immediately like get their first 3 or 5 or 10 clients off their network. I mean, that's just like, that's the way we all do it. Like, I don't think that's even a cheat code. I think that's just like common sense 101 stuff. I think the people who do it the other way are taking the hard road of like, I'm going to go bang on doors when nobody knows me. Like, good Lord, like that's an uphill battle. I can't imagine trying to do that.
Well, sales is the lifeblood, right? Like it's a lifeblood of the company. And I think in my past experiences of trying to build businesses that have failed and then ones that have worked, when I failed, it's like I was so focused on product, so focused on it, and not focused on selling it.
Yeah, that's 100% my experience too. I had at least 10 little ideas for businesses that I started before I actually started one that worked and employed me full time. And of those 10, most of them were cool idea in my head. And I was unfortunately a software engineer, so it meant I could build them. And I spent a lot of time building them and no time selling them. And so that's like a problem as old as time. But yeah, I mean, let's talk about the sales side and the customer acquisition side. People are pretty quick to come on board then, because I mean, again, like you're getting them pretty fast. Is it because it's a low risk thing? They're like, hey, Kurt, you go ahead, get me somebody. And if they're great, I'm going to pay you. Is that the sort of way you're lowering the bar?
Partially. So I mentioned I pivoted from software primary, staffing secondary to, it's like a seesaw, right? Went the opposite direction. Software's a tough sell.
Yeah, they got to do a bunch of work to adopt it. Like it's a pain in the ass. Yeah.
Yeah. Where I'm like, okay, you need a purchasing assistant or you need an estimator or you need this. Great. I got one for you, right? 70% cost saving over what you're paying for domestic. What's the worst case scenario? You try and it doesn't pan out for you. Okay. Right. A couple months in and you're like, all right, you're done. So it's the sales cycle and getting people to try it has been pretty easy. The biggest impediment is those people's capacity to onboard a new hire, really is what it comes down to. But like in terms of getting a sign off on the dollars or any of that, we've faced little to no objection around that.
Seeing those friction points later in the process, that's kind of good because it's an opportunity. Like you could eventually build a whole onboarding training program that you sell along with it, or some kind of like, I don't know, right? There's opportunity if it's hard for them because they still want the people.
So you had mentioned about like offshoring is not in our industry yet, right? But there was one other opportunity I identified is that so much offshoring is done as I'm paying you less, so I'm treating you as less, right? And for us, we're like, that doesn't work. And we're interviewing our clients when we're talking to them, like, you cannot abuse these people. They are people with families and needs and goals and dreams and all these things. Like, you can't do that. And so we found this massive opportunity of approaching it in a better way, right? So when we're onboarding, the reason I mention it now is because it ties into onboarding. When we're onboarding, we're culturally onboarding, not just functionally onboarding, right? And that is a big key because, I mean, we've been doing this for Chicago Brass for a while. I've still got some of my first couple hires offshore still working with us, right? And flourishing and doing well. Like, I don't see a tenure diminishment because they're offshore. Now, if I treated them the way I would like a Fiverr subcontractor or an Upwork, yes, different world, right? But like these are
picture you beating your Fiverr workers. No, just kidding. Yeah, right. I know what you mean exactly.
They're full-fledged members of the team.
Yeah. I think this is something I've noticed because I've, again, being in tech for 15 years now, like early days when I was doing my internships in college, the overseas tech talent that we worked with was almost kept in this like separate, literally at GE, they were kept in a separate little area of the office and like cordoned off. It was a little bizarre in hindsight. I'm sure they don't do that anymore, but it was just like, it was very much an us and them. We didn't talk to them much. They didn't speak much English. There was no cultural overlap, like very different. Today, night and day difference. I mean, like, but not just my companies, just in general, the client companies I see too, the way they handle, employees all over the world. It's like, there's much more of this like globalized culture too. And the I'll call them kids, like the people in their 20s who were hiring out of India and parts of Africa, they're much more culturally like similar to Americans than they used to be, because I think they're exposed to a lot of the same stuff that we are now. It's not, we don't have that same like isolation that we did by countries 20, 30 years ago. So it's really a different world. If you haven't, I guess my encouragement is if you're just super against, offshoring or sending any work to anybody overseas, like it might be time to come back and try it again, because there's just a lot of difference now than there was 20 years ago, 15 years ago.
I'm with you 100%.
Yeah. So customers are pretty quick to get on this, and the you guys are able to like get them on and get them placements, and then there's some friction around the onboarding, but like that's a problem that could be solved down the road. Like, talk to me more about like what is challenging in this service, or when you're getting people like placed, and is it right now, is the limiting factor you, or is the limiting factor like the people around you, or the number of talented people you can find? Like, what is it?
So a few challenges. One that I can point to directly is we have yet to have, we have some of our clients, like, I don't want to place one person at a company. Our goal is to build teams, right? We want to be at 10, 15, 20, 30 people per company. And so we're still early on enough that we haven't built these big, we've got one that we put like 10 people at, which feels great, but most people we've only put 1 or 2 people. And so our goal now is to keep building from it. And I get it. Most people are like, look, at best case scenario, they started with us 60 days ago or 90 days ago. So like it takes time for them to trust it and then build from there. So that's a potential issue, I guess, where I don't think we've had enough run time to know if it is yet, but it could be. For me, because of my existing business, the biggest friction point I have is balancing my time and emotional energy and capacity between the two. Because this is the shiny penny right now, right? But if I drop the other one, if my base gets wiped out, then who cares about the new
Shiny
one?
penny that's paying you very little relative to the more stable whatever pile of coins you got over there. Yeah. I definitely have experienced a little of that too. Buying a second business a year ago, and it's like I like both of them a lot in their own ways. And some weeks I want to do one more than the other, and other times I'm sucked one direction or the other, and it's balancing that is hard. Have you figured out any like what works for you? I mean, are you I know you're a pretty organized guy. Do you like to time track and have yourself blocked off for certain things, or what do you do?
Yeah, I'm a pretty structured person, so I will block out, okay, this day I'm doing this. This is one thing I've always had, regardless, and still now. I take one day a week that is all lead gen. So it is all sales focused, right? Because it's again, I think you can have the best product in the world, but if you're not out there telling people it's the best product, no one's going to care. So I spend a full day a week doing lead gen, and right now I'm splitting it like 75% the new thing, 25% my existing. But it was the opposite until a couple weeks ago. Um, on the other front, I do it more based on where my head is at and what like I'm good at identifying what I'm going to be capable of that day. So I have a Kurt worksheet that I fill out every day. That's how I start my day, right? And it is what is one thing you're going to get accomplished today? And I have a running an Excel spreadsheet where I have a running like how many days it's been since I failed on this. So it's no matter what, come hell or high water, what's one thing you're getting accomplished, and then who is one person that you're going to very positively impact in that day. So I'll have my big to-do list, but as long as those two things get checked off, like I had a successful day. So right now I'm doing 3 days that to do is my new business and 2 days is my existing.
That's super interesting. I like that a lot. I think that's something that I've noticed about myself too. There's certain days where I have the energy to do some kinds of work, and others where it's others. And I mean, first of all, going back to the beginning, like one day for lead gen, that's fantastic. I love that idea, and like, that's something I need to like block off intentionally because I think it's so easy to let some of those tasks just go by the wayside, right? Like the follow-ups, the boring shit. Like I like the like fun stuff, like having conversations with business owners is great fun. But doing the follow-ups and the grind of researching and stuff like that, like I do try to get my assistant to do a lot of it, but still like I have to touch some of it, and it's like getting myself to do that. I like the idea of just reserving a day and be like, here's the day. Some of this I'm gonna grind and I'm just gonna do it. And like that's it.
If sales flounders, right? Like you can get caught up in all the work you have today, but if you're not selling, you don't have work tomorrow, right?
That's right. Yeah. And it's why almost every agency at some point goes through that feast famine cycle they talk about, is because they get so busy and bogged down in delivering client work, they then don't prospect, and then they're stuck in this, fight. And yeah, anyway, it's like one of the more common problems in early agencies for sure. No, what I was gonna kind of jumping off of that, like time tracking and structure, one thing I've noticed is that not everybody is as structured as us and like deals with that well. Do you have people around you that are just not that level of structure? And how do you, I'm going to say, how do you deal with them? Because this is a selfish question. I want to know because I'm still learning how to deal with people who they're just a little more like fluid and they don't have things organized and like they don't have their shit together like I do. Like, how do you manage them or just even like work with them in general?
There's a baseline level of organization that you might be a lovely person, able to be effective in your own way, but like we can't collaborate together if we're so far apart, right? So it's establishing what that baseline is. Assuming people are above a baseline and they're able to be effective, it's labeling it as saying like, you're not less or worse than me, or, because you are more free flowing in your approach. I care more about efficacy than the means by which you get there, as long as it's ethical, right? So I don't struggle with it too much. I think where I do struggle is, if anything, it's communication. If I'm communicating to them and they're hearing it differently than I'm saying it, or I'm saying it differently than they're hearing it. That's where I think it comes into problem. But actually getting work done, it's what's important to me. And as long as we're able to produce the raw result of what's important to me, I look, I want to work with people that are their whole selves, not coming in and being a robot or trying to be somebody they're not. Come in your whole self, and generally we can make it work together. It's my
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah, yeah. That's good insight. Something that you said earlier that I wanted to come back to is with Chicago Brass, the market is a kind of fixed size market. Like there's only so much room to grow and so many new builders that are looking for high end materials, right? So like you're just kind of I don't want to say stuck, but you can grow a little bit, but it's probably marginal year over year, right? Whereas with the new company with ADBM, you see a lot more white space. Like, why is that? Because it's still kind of the same market. Is it just because this is a big shift happening in that market? Is there still a cap on that market, but at least this is like giving you a new, revenue channel? Like, how do you think about that?
So, Chicago Brass is very geographically tied. We're in Chicago, Milwaukee, Minneapolis. We do work outside of it, but there is a geographic aspect of it. Where with this, I got the whole U.S. Chicago Brass also specializes in like a very specific product category, where this is broader. We can do much different product categories. So there's a cap to everything, right? But the cap to this is much, much further away than what Chicago Brasses is. I can scale this to something very substantive before I even start getting concerned about that.
Yeah, that's interesting. And another thing too, there is like, and I'm going to ask this in a naive way intentionally. Why not just do, placements for anybody in any industry? Why specialize? What's the advantage there?
So there's two sides of it. There's the marketing and image side, and then there's the real side, right? So the marketing image side is I've got tens of thousands of competitors if I'm a generic offshore placing company. Like, why in the world would they use me? Because eventually I'm going to burn out through my network, right? Everyone that I'm friends with is going to have worked with me and be done. So how do I grow beyond that? So that's the image side of it, right? And what is it? The margin is in the niches, right? Like I'd rather operate in a space where I can have margin and provide. So that's the image side. The actual functional side is we know what it takes for staff to be successful in these industries. We understand the pressures they're going to have. We understand, why people quit and leave the industry, why people flourish, all these pain points. And so as we're interviewing and screening and then ultimately placing people, we are able to identify some of those leading indicators where we just say, nope, we might place you and you might be there 3 months, but then you're going to be gone. And that doesn't work for anybody, right? So we know what to look for and how to fill it. And I think that has been a massive, because people in my industry, in my Chicago Brass email, I probably get 20 to 30 emails a day from companies offering to get me offshore staff. But they don't have the slightest idea what my company does. They have no idea. They're offering me $3 an hour. You can get an amazing full-time person. I'm like, it's cheaper, but it ain't that cheap. Like, this is not realistic. So by living in the world that our customers live in, and we can also be agile and adapt if their world changes.
That's 100% been my experience. One of the analogies I try to use to illustrate this is if, Kurt, you said to me, hey, we do offshore staffing, and you asked like, hey, do you happen to know anybody who needs offshore staffing? I'm like, well, like everybody. And it's like everybody, therefore nobody. Like I'm not going to introduce you to everybody I've ever met. But when you say, do you know anybody in building materials who's looking to hire this year? I'm like, I mean, maybe I do. Maybe I have a general contractor who mentioned, trying to hire in building materials. Like, honestly, like I might have one, but that's a very specific memory that I'm going to attach to Kurt and I'm going to make that intro. I can't make a intro to everybody I've ever met or like recommend you to everybody. And that's one of my biggest pet peeves with new agency owners. They go in and they're like, well, I'll do any work that anybody will pay me for, And I'm just like, dude, so you do nothing. Like no one's going to remember that. Yeah.
One of my mentors said, when everything's important, nothing's important.
Yes. Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
So,
yeah. And the other thing too, I found is that there's a huge amount of credibility. And this goes to your point about the cold emails you get every day. If draft.dev, which does, technical writing aimed at software engineers, if we just said we do any kind of content writing, we'd be one of those same 20 people emailing you every day about content writing, because I'm sure you get a million of those too. But instead we say, we work with these, 5 companies like these 5, and we pick like 5 biggest in the industry that we work with, right? everybody's heard of them. They know exactly who those people are. They know that they do top quality work, and they're like, oh, okay, so you're legit, and you know our industry. You're not just saying you do freelance writing. It's so much easier. And again, this is counterintuitive, but the smaller you focus in, and the more relatable you can become, the easier it is to grow fast, bigger.
You can always broaden, right? Like let's say you're killing it in your niche and you're maxing it out. Fine, broaden. But like it's a lot harder to contract than it is to, expand out.
Totally. So another thing I wanted to talk to you about, because you've been at this as an entrepreneur in different businesses for a while, and we've talked about some of like failures briefly, but like let's talk about the feeling side of entrepreneurship, because I think one of the things that it's easy to miss when you listen to a podcast like this, like Kurt, you're doing pretty well. Karl, you're doing pretty well right now. We both sound really happy and jazzed, and we're all excited about growth and potential and all that stuff. But like we know that's not our life 100% of the time. That's like, 50-50 maybe at best. And so we're in a good spot right now. That's great. But like half the time when you talk to me, I'm like, oh my God, like I'm, letting go of somebody, and like we just don't have the orders this year. Like it's rough. So like what have you noticed about those highs and lows? And, now that you've been through enough of them, what do you do to kind of like level yourself or kind of, live through it?
Yeah, those highs and lows, both of them are so unproductive, because they're so rarely tied to what you did that day, right? Like there's so many variables outside of our control that can make us succeed or fail. So I'm a data person, right? Like I have all these mechanisms and tools I put inside to sort of keep myself stabilized and on an even playing field. So I'm a big journaling person, right? I mentioned my Kurt worksheet at the beginning of the day. At the end of the day, I put in in how I felt I did for the day, like a 1 to 10 ranking, right? Like how did I feel about my work? Like, am I going to bed saying this was a good day of work, or was this not, right? And it's, and I try to look at it based on what I can control and what I did, not necessarily efficacy. There's a difference between getting something done and getting things done. And if I'm right, like if you get something done, that feels really good. If you start 20 things and don't actually move any of them across the finish line, it doesn't feel good. So I have really focused where I can, and it's tough, right? Like when cash flow sucks, right? Or you got to let someone go, because even if it's their fault, it still is a shitty feeling, right? Like when you have to deal with those situations, giving yourself the grace and the space before and after to filter, deal with the emotion side of it and let it run. That stuff sucks. But aside from days like that, where it's the normal ebbs and flows, I try to make it not about my wins, not about my losses, but about my personal productivity and impact.
I need to get there. I feel like I still too much ride on these highs when we close a couple new deals in a week or something. I'm like, oh fuck yeah, I'm so smart. Like yeah, let's do it. And then I have a week where it's like dead, or a month where it's dead, and I'm just like, oh, is this it? Am I done? And like neither one is true. But yet my brain goes to these extreme points, and it's a tough. I haven't figured out the full balance, but I like the idea of just trying to find a metric there that you can point to that is like, I did the things I needed to do today. I followed my strategic plan. This is what I, said will work. And I'm just going to kind of have some blind faith for a while here and, see what happens on the other side.
Number one, I said I try this. I didn't say I implement it perfectly every day, right? Like I still get in the fetal position once in a while and get a good cry out. But I think we're tinkers, right? And sometimes we just have to trust what we've done and run with it, right? Like you want to be receptive and agile and all these things, but you also have to have some stubbornness once in a while too, to just ride it out, right? Like I've put paralysis by analysis. All right, I've analyzed this as much as I need to. I've done what I have. Like I got to ride it out and have some patience and see if this works.
Yeah. How much do you tend to be an analyzer versus like a just do and iterate kind of person? Because I mean, well, I don't know. I'm curious where you think you land on that spectrum.
I try not to live in both places at the same time. So based on my mindset, my psyche of that day and how my life in general is going, I find myself more in one than another. I would like to claim I'm more of an analyzer. I think I a lot of times analyze to justify my gut feeling, and right. So it feels like I don't know, imbalanced there. I think I'm both. I think if I were to aggregate all my data together for a month or 6, and maybe this is a good idea. Maybe I should like note down on a day, how did I make decisions? And then do it the next day, right? And see how I land. I'll bet I'm pretty close to 50-50 between the two.
I am much more personally on the doer side. I tend to just, like jump and then go back and count what what we're supposed to be counting to before, like how many feet I have to jump out. So, and that, it's in some ways as an entrepreneur, that can be a good thing. Like you're pointing to, it's like you just need to get out there and stop analyzing and just make action. But on the other side, it is beneficial often to catch some little gotchas or some, avoid some missteps, to have done a little bit of pre-work before that. And I've just found my tactic, it's not even a secret, is just like surround myself with other people who can do that kind of detail or like, data analysis work, and assign it to them before I let myself make a decision or jump into it. So, they'll come back to me with a report or, analytics that say, hey, you're right, or you were wrong. And then great, I can at least have checked that box. But it's hard because I want to just like jump, and I throw my team off all the time when not all the time, but every few months I'll come in there and be like, I got an idea. This is what we're doing next. I'm going to start selling it. Let's see what happens. And they're like, hold on. Like, we don't even know what so I do have to rein it in, but at the same time, it's all about finding ways to like balance your own weaknesses out. Right. And, there's other people with other strengths. So
In my leadership team, when we're discussing a new initiative or a shift, if there's three roles and we assign it to everyone pick, and it doesn't matter sort of what your beliefs are, it's the role. So optimist, pessimist, pragmatist, right? Like everyone gets one of those, and then it's tear this idea apart, explain why this is God's gift to everybody, and then like look at this logically and see if this will actually pan out. So create different voices and some dissension around it.
that's a cool idea. Yeah. Cause I think this is something I've noted too as an entrepreneur. When you're running your own company, everybody's going to tell you yes, like that. Nobody wants to say like, no, Kurt, shut up. Like that's wrong. But if you can create a role that says you're supposed to tell me I'm wrong, then at least like there's permission there that's very explicit. Like your job is to tell me I'm wrong, not just you're supposed to. Like, yeah, I think that's a really good idea. I got to do that. Okay, so the last real like kind of feelings related question here I wanted to ask you about is like support network, because I know we both are part of Entrepreneurs Organization in Chicago, and that's part of our support network, I imagine. Like, what are some of the things you found are helpful for you as far as like surrounding yourself with people that kind of help keep you leveled out, or how much of your sort of mental balance do you get from the people around you?
So EO is a huge side of it for me. I think it's why I was drawn to the organization in the first place, and I've been in roughly 9 years. So I didn't really have a strong position for that beforehand, and so I've gone there. I try to empower members of my leadership team, in both companies, to be that, right? So we can be that for each other, humanize it, and work together in those feelings. Look, this is not meant to be an evangelical comment, but I'm a Catholic, and prayer brings a lot of stability and support to me. So I go there quite regularly. And then talking, I think I built a circle of friends outside of EO and just of my network that I believe can understand and empathize with at least portions of what I'm doing. Right. So I guess those are my short answers.
No, that's awesome. Okay, so this is off the wall question, or sort of changing subject here, but I like to ask everybody because I'm a big reader, although much less of a reader these days with small kids. Reading good books lately in the last couple of years that have really influenced you, or anything you recommend often to other entrepreneurs?
Rework by the base camp guys. That's one of my favorites because it's just like most of the messaging is like, hey, stupid, just do this. It's that easy, right? So that's a pretty good one. There's a book called Boutique that I'm reading right now. Have you heard of that one?
No, I have not. Yeah.
So it's a guy who used to be high up in EO. He was high up in YPO. And it is a three-part book. The first part is about starting a boutique business, so niche, right? And it's almost all agency based. So it's probably relevant for your group, is your audience is it's the first third of the book is starting it. The second third is about scaling it, and the final one is about selling it. And it's very, like, each chapter is like 3 or 4 pages, super pragmatic. It's similar to Rework. I like directness. I don't always love the some of these books, man, just turn into like people patting themselves on the back, and
They get very fluffy. Yeah,
yeah,
totally. Yeah,
that's
totally.
a more PC word than what I was going to use.
Right.
But yes, so that is a great one that I think that is very actionable. Like every chapter I read, I'm like, all right, tomorrow I am doing this, and I'm taking away actionable things to do.
That's great. Yeah, I'll have to check that out. That sounds really up my alley. And then the other thing, last thing I'll ask you here is if we check back in a year, which I hope to do, assuming, all things work out well, what do you hope to have accomplished, or where do you hope the business is? What are some of your kind of 1 year out goals right now?
A year out, I want to be at 150 ongoing placements minimum. And I think that's very achievable with our run rate. There's always going to be attrition. Losing a customer does not mean you have a failed product, right? There will always be some attrition. I'd love to get to 150 by the end of my full first year. So by the end of May of next year, I'd like to be at 150. I want to have then replaced myself in the sales role and have somebody else doing it. It's not that I don't want to do it. I'm jazzed by it now, but at a certain point, that's going to end, and my ability to do it will diminish. So if I hit those two key metrics by May, I think I'm on the right path for things going well.
Awesome. That's great. We'll check back in the summer or fall next year. And thanks so much, Kurt, for coming on and doing this. Where can people find out more about you or ADBM or anything else?
So adbm.agency is our website. I'm on LinkedIn. Either place, easy way to get a hold of me. And I introduce a lot of times if people ask me, like, they want to hear about my company, or especially if they're skeptical about offshoring or any of these things, right? I connect them with my team in the Philippines. I'm like, well, let's let them talk to you, right? Like, you can prove it. They can prove it. So it feels like a dog and pony show sometimes, but generally it works.
No, I think that's fantastic. Awesome, Kurt. As always, good to talk to you. And thanks again for doing this.
Likewise, brother.
All right. Thank you for watching this episode of Retain Trust. If you like this one, give it a thumbs up and subscribe on YouTube. It takes 2 seconds and it helps others find out about the show. And if you have questions or suggestions for a future episode, leave a comment. See you next time.